Entire Bible, where we look at the entire Bible and find out stuff that no one tells you about in church. Um, we are on episode 19 tonight. That's pretty amazing. The number keeps getting higher and higher. Um, so last time we looked at the book of Ruth, nice little short story, kind of a break from the epic uh, style of things. And we talked a bit about this was the first book that we looked at that is positioned in different places in the Jewish Bible and the Christian Bible. And we saw how the different placement of the book, the story actually leads you to notice different things in it. So we took a look at in the Jewish Bible, the book of Ruth follows the end of the book of Proverbs, which ended with that poem about the woman of worth, right? The worthy woman. And then she herself, Ruth, is called a worthy woman in there. And so somehow you can use this to interpret what's going on that is not spoken in that story. And you can use the story to give some concrete flesh and bones to this idealized image of what it means to live a good life. We will be looking at the Song of Songs later. I'm going to be kind of splicing in some of these um, books that are different from like the main storyline because they're often set at a time when the main storyline is going, like the Book of Ruth. We also looked in the Ruth in the Christian Bible, where it immediately follows the end of the book of Judges, where there is no king in the land and it's anarchy and it's terrible, to Ruth giving birth to the grandfather of David, who will become king in the book that we're looking at today, although we will not yet get to him. That comes next week. So as we move on, we go to the next book that is in the same position of both Bibles. It's the book of, which is traditionally called the book of Samuel. By the way, biblical books don't have titles. These are just convenient reference points that people have ascribed to them, usually in much later times. In Jewish tradition, you identify a book by the first words in the book, not by a title. But anyway, we call this the book of Samuel. If you've ever seen like a quotation of a biblical passage where it'll have a number in front of the book, like 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, there's actually only one book of Samuel, but it is divided into two parts because you can only get so much on a scroll. So literally, it'd be kind of like in the early days of digital technology when you could only put so much on a flash drive, right? So you would have to have a second flash drive to have the rest of it. The book of Samuel is like that. There's a first and second scroll, but it's one story. And as we go through, not today, but later on in the book of Samuel, we'll start to look at some of the Psalms, some of the poetry of the Bible, which is often placed in this story that we'll be looking at. So that'll be next week. And after that comes the book of Kings, Game of Thrones season 5, where we'll be seeing a lot of connections between the book of Proverbs and some more of those scrolls, like the book of Ecclesiastes, the book of, what am I thinking of here? The Song of Songs. So this is still our main sort of storyline, but we'll be looking at these other pieces as well. Okay, so our story begins with a family. We're told there was a guy who had two wives, and one of the wives had sons or children, and the other one didn't have children. Remember, this is sort of a theme we saw in the book of Ruth, right? Where Ruth had a husband died, and in the end, she's able to marry someone else, have kids. So it's kind of sets it up in a similar way. So the guy's name is Elkanah, and his wives are Hannah and Penina, not Panini. And it's kind of a replay of one of the stories in Genesis where you have the two wives, each of whom wants to have children, but one of them can't have children, and so you have this really complicated situation. It's kind of replaying that story. Okay, so there was a guy with two wives. He lived in this place called Ramathaim, also known as Ramah, which is sort of in the central hill country. And when they wanted to go engage in pilgrimage feasts, they would go to this place called Shiloh. And so that's the setup. They're going to Shiloh every year. And on one of their trips, um, actually on every trip, it says Elkanah favors the barren wife because, like Jacob in the book of Genesis, he's married to two women, but he only loves one of them. Which I don't know why he would marry two women if he only loved one of them, but that's how it goes. So anyway, Hannah has no children, but he loves her. He gives her more stuff. But the other woman, Peninnah, constantly harasses her, and so Hannah feels bad. So that's kind of the conflict that begins the story. Hannah feels bad. She wants to feel good. And her husband tries to encourage her, say, you're more worth to me more than 10 sons. Don't worry that you don't have any children. Be happy. But she is not happy. And so she goes to the local shrine at Shiloh, and she sort of pours her heart out there in a prayer for children. And we're told that the priest there, this guy Eli, is watching her when she does this. And so she makes a vow. She says, "Lord of Yahweh of hosts, if you give me a child, I will dedicate him to you." It says, "No razor shall ever touch his head." This is a reference to a institution in this culture where people can dedicate themselves for certain periods of time to the spiritual life, basically. It's something that we didn't talk about when we were looking at the Torah, but it's this commandment here, this law. Uh, this is God speaking to Moses. He says, when men or women solemnly take what's called a Nazir, a Nazirite vow to dedicate themselves to me, they shall abstain from strong drink, and they can't cut their hair. So that's the thing about if I'll dedicate a child to you and he won't cut his hair or she won't cut her hair. So that's where that thing comes from. So she wants a child. She makes this vow: if you give me a child, I'll give you back to him. I guess she wants a male child too, right? And we're told that the priest is watching her, and she's praying silently, which is kind of odd because before we had silent reading, everyone read things out loud, and the same thing mainly with any kind of communication. You would always verbalize stuff. But for some reason, she doesn't talk, and so he thinks she's drunk. They get into a conversation, says, take your drunkenness out of her. She says, "I'm not drunk, I'm just really sad." And so she, gets to unburden herself to him. And so he says, "Okay, may God grant you whatever you want." And she says, "I hope so." She really looks kind of doubtful there too. Okay, so that's the story. She wants a child. She wants a male child to feel better about herself, and then she's going to give the child up if she gets one. Okay, so we are told she has sex with her husband, and Yahweh remembered her, right? Meaning that she conceived a child. Okay, so they're back at home in Ramah. She gets a child, and she names him Shemuel or Samuel, right? So Shemuel literally means God has heard or God has heeded. Think of in the book of Genesis, Ishmael, right? God has heeded. Um, Yishmael, Shemuel, they're the same name. It's just you have two different names for God. One is Yahweh, the other is El. Okay, so she names him, and when they're going up again, she says, "I want to wean him first before I give him up." Well, yeah, one would hope, right? So she's going to keep him with her for a while, and then she'll bring her up to the shrine and hand him over. So finally, she's going to take him up to Shiloh, hand him over to the priest, and she reminds him who she is. I prayed for the child. The Lord granted my request. Now I'm going to give him over to the Lord. And so Samuel is now handed over to the priest here. And then she has another prayer. This is a very famous prayer. It is actually a kind of psalm. It's called the Song of Hannah. And I've sort of put it here all together because it's it's it has a surprise. Most of it's just about how her experience of receiving something and of righting a wrong, what she feels is a wrong that she's denied something, now she has it. She relates this to the general human condition, right? And the idea that God helps people overcome these obstacles. This is also famous in Christian tradition because this is Um, this is what Mary plagiarizes when she has Jesus, basically, right? This is, or before she has Jesus, that she basically puts herself in the position of Hannah. Okay, so how does this go? My heart exalts in Yahweh. So I'm happy finally. I've swallowed up my enemies. I guess that's what she thinks about the other, her rival wife, the husband's wife there. She calls this a victory. Um, all of apparently this is something that she deserves because God weighs actions. She talks about the bows of the mighty being broken, so the power structures of the world can be overturned by this deity. Um, God puts to death and gives life, casts down to Sheol and brings up. Everything that happens can be influenced by God, basically, is what she's saying. All creation belongs to God. The last line of this is interesting. Okay, so after saying that bad guys are destroyed and God rules forever and ever, he says, "May he give strength to his king and exalt the horn of his anointed." Well, we haven't heard anything about a king yet, have we? Right? Now, often scholars will say, okay, well, this is probably a traditional prayer that was developed at a different time because when a kingship existed and it's going to put on her lips. May well be, but of course, for the story, this is part of the story. It's going to be about the emergence of a king, right? So it's kind of a surprise within the story world. There is no king, but she says, may God give strength to his king and exalt the horn. That's just a poetic way of saying strength to his anointed. Okay, now we got to learn about the term anointed. Anointed means having oil poured on your head, not motor oil, but olive oil, right? I once knew a woman who actually put olive oil in her hair constantly. Apparently, it's a way to keep your hair good, although kind of greasy after a while, right? But anyway, anointing. This is a ritual of appointing. So in Israel, in the Israelite culture that produced the Bible, you nominate, you appoint a king by pouring oil on his, or in a couple cases, her head. There are no crowns in this tradition. Crowns are European invention. So if you're anointed, that means you're appointed to be a ruler. And remember, back at the end of the book of Judges, there was no king in the land. It might have been nice if there were one, because maybe things would not be so bad. So there's this implicitly positive idea about kingship, which when we get to it, we'll find not everyone in this story likes kings, including God, apparently. So as we enter into this theme of kingship, we'll see that even within the same book of the Bible, there are different attitudes towards monarchic power. And they are put together in the same story. Sometimes you have different characters voicing them, but the purpose of it from the perspective of the reader is to ask, okay, well, what are we supposed to think about this? How should society be governed? What's the ideal form of collective life for people to govern themselves by, right? That was Aristotle and the Greeks' questions. What's the best constitution? Well, in the Bible, you don't have, constitutional structures, but you do have this idea of kingship and whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. So we'll learn about this as we go. Anyway, somehow she's saying that God is going to have a king, like a human being. Yeah, go for it. The kingship, a reluctance to pay taxes? That's a good question. I'm sure that's a reluctance to kingship anywhere, but it's not unique here. As we'll see, that actually sort of ties in with this. Now, we actually have seen the same thing about kingship back in the Torah, where God said, if you want a king, you can have one, but there's these limitations on it, like he can't be rich. But anyway, we'll get to that. So yeah, okay. So they leave the child there at Shiloh to learn how to, I guess, be an assistant. He's not actually a priest, but he gets to be an assistant to the priest. And then we have a contrast. This is a theme that now introduces. So far, it's been a story of Hannah and her son. Now it's going to be about Eli, the priest, and his sons. Right? So Eli is sort of the person in charge, but although he might be a good leader, his sons are not very good leaders. We have this long description of how his sons, in exercising their priestly role, abuse their office. They they glean some of the sacrifices for themselves rather than offering them to God and that sort of thing. So they're people in power who are abusing their power. Um, and at the same time, then they are contrasted with Samuel. Samuel um, is given this nice introduction. Again, the priest blesses him. May this be a good situation. And then we go back again to his bad sons, in which we're told they're also involved in sexually assaulting women during the pilgrimages, which is not good. So he sort of gives them a talking to, but we're told they disregarded their father's warning since the Lord wanted them dead. So again, the one thing we know about God's attitude towards people is he doesn't give a lot of leeway to people in charge. If people are having an authority role, he doesn't take kindly to them abusing it. So he says they're dead I'm going to allow them to not listen to their father. Now, normally we think in terms of free will, right? We all have free will. We can make choices. We wouldn't think of God causing people to disregard something, right? But this is an idea that comes out, especially in this history. It's what scholars call dual causality, right? Causality is what causes things. We would think our choices cause things, but here in these stories, you have indeed people's choices choosing things, but it's also assumed that there's some sort of divine impulse that is pushing people in one way or another. It doesn't explore the question of whether people really have the freedom to make a choice. It just says there's some kind of divine causality behind this as well. But it's all based on this idea of judgment on the abuse of power. Okay, meanwhile, Samuel, as they're getting worse and worse, he's getting better and better. He grows in stature and in worth in the estimation of Yahweh and the people. Good. Okay, finally, a man of God. That's a expression for some sort of prophetic figure. Man of God can also mean like a divine being sometimes. Um, Someone with supernatural powers. It's just a general term in the Bible for people who are connected with the divine. So this prophetic figure comes and talks to Eli, speaks on God's behalf, basically says, I assigned you to be priest, and look at you're allowing your sons to do all these terrible things. Well, there's going to be repercussions. It's a long repercussion. Basically, he says that your sons are going to die, and your family will lose this role of priests. Someone else will take this over at this time. That's going to start to happen now. They're all going to die very soon. And then part of the story is that there's eventually going to be a new sort of lineage of priests, but we don't see that till a couple of weeks from now. Okay, we're now go to Samuel himself. He hasn't really done anything yet other than to be good. But now we're told he's sleeping one night in the temple, in the shrine at Shiloh. And we're told the Lord calls to him and he says, yeah, I'm here, but he doesn't know it's God. He thinks it's Eli talking. So he goes and says, Eli, you called me, I'm here. And he says, why did you wake me up? I didn't call you, go back to sleep. And as in good storytelling, it happens 3 times. Right? And it's only in the 3rd time we're told Eli understood that the Lord was calling him. So he said, go to sleep. And if you're called, reply, speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. Okay, so he figures out that God's trying to communicate with Samuel. Now that's important too, because he was just communicated to by a man of God. Apparently Samuel is going to have some sort of role of that sort pretty soon too. So this is sort of his inaugural call as a prophet. Okay, so it happens, Samuel, calling for Samuel. He says, I'm here, I'm listening. And then basically God repeats to Samuel what he told the priest about how I'm going to judge them and all this. It's redundant in that sense. We, the audience, already know what's going to happen, but the fact that God speaks to him, this little kid, indicates that this kid is going to be important in the whole story. So he goes and tells tells the priest what was said, and I guess, well, the priest says, well, I already know that, but apparently this signals to Eli that Samuel is going to be a prophet. Okay, then again, there's sort of a time passes theme where he grows up and he assumes a prophetic role where everything he says comes to pass. throughout the country, everyone treats him as trustworthy. His word spread throughout Israel. That's an interesting expression. All right. So this is the origin story of our prophet here. Now we're actually we're going to lose sight of Samuel for a couple chapters here, so that he can get old and then become this big figure. But first, we have to have the judgment on the bad priests. So we're told there's a war brewing. The Philistines gather for an attack. Who are the Philistines? We haven't actually had any episodes with them. If we read the entire book of Judges, they would show up in there. But they are neighbors, basically. They are people who lived on this little strip of land right here, right on the Mediterranean coast. And there are some traditions in the Bible on where they come from, but the names don't really correspond to modern names, so it's difficult to tell where they're coming from. But archaeologically, we have remains of this culture, and based on their material culture as well as some indications from Egyptian records, they came from the Aegean, right? What scholars call the Mycenaean civilization. Mycenaeans like Homer and Troy and all that. So in the Bronze Age, like 2000 BC, the two great civilizations here were Egypt and Mycenae, right? And they would have all sorts of so we know that there was contact between East and West about 1,000 years before the story we're on. Eventually, though, this civilization collapses, and apparently this was a colony. Sort of they were migrants. They migrated to this new land and settled. The Greeks would do that later on as well. So the Philistines, or the Philistine as they're called in Egyptian sources, they lived on the coast. They had 5 cities, and they were an agricultural people. They were also warriors. They had great technical skills. But these are the places that they lived in. Notice Gaza is one of them. Although Gaza itself existed before the Philistines got there, they simply are running it now. But they're on the coast. So those are the Philistines. We're not told why they made war on Israel. It probably, historically would have to do something with the fact that tribal societies tend to raid lowland societies, and so maybe they're retaliating. Maybe they're both sort of trying to control trade routes, whatever reasons people normally fight. But anyway, there is a war going on. So they're going to attack Israel. So there's a crisis that needs to be met. Okay, so they all go out to fight at this place called Aphek, and the Philistines are victorious. Okay, so the enemy won. And then the Israelites ask, why did this happen? Why did God let us be defeated? Let's go get the ark of God from Shiloh, that it may go into battle among us and save us from the grasp of our enemies. Remember, the ark is this box. It's tebet in Hebrew. Ark is just a Latin word for box. So it's not Noah's ark, it's Noah's box. But it's the same word. Noah's ark, Ark of the Covenant, same word in Hebrew. Anyway, the idea is that if we have this with us, because this is sort of the symbol of divine presence, they used that during the conquest of Canaan and all that. If we have this with us, we'll win. Yeah, and that's what the Nazis thought in Indiana Jones, right? They were wrong. Okay, so they get their box, and Eli's sons go with them, and the Philistines are terrified. But they say, we're doomed, but let's fight, die with our boots on. Let's fight these people and try to stay alive. And they defeat the Israelites again. Phinehas's sons die in battle conveniently, and the ark is taken by the enemy. Okay, so this brings about that judgment about the abuse of leaders, but it also leads to a problem, namely that our symbol of our God is now being held captive by our enemies. So what are we going to do about that? Now, we're also told that Eli is going to die for having such sons. The news comes to the city of what's happened. He's asked, what happened? And he says, your sons are dead. And apparently he's stricken by this so powerfully that he falls backwards and breaks his neck. Okay, so that's the end of the bad priests, right? Okay. Meanwhile, we have an interesting story about Phinehas, right? One of his sons. his wife was was just being pregnant, having birth at that moment, right? And of course, this gives her a chance to sort of, with this birth, symbolize the end of their lineage. She's dying in childbirth, and the assistant saying, "Don't be afraid, you have a son." And yet she says, uh, "Call him Ikavod, because gone is the glory from Israel." The glory of the Lord is like what goes in the box. So the name of the child sort of represents the loss of that sacred artifact. By the way, Ichabod, remember Ichabod Crane from, what was that? What was the story? Sleepy Hollow, yeah. So Ichabod literally means, where is the glory? Something like that. Okay, yeah, you got to know where these names come from. Okay, so that line is dead. Okay, the Philistines, the enemy, they take the ark to one of their towns, to Ashdod. And we're told they put it in their temple, in the temple of Dagon. Now, what is Dagon? Dagon is actually a common Near Eastern deity. We know very little about his functions other than that he was imaged as male. There's a late tradition that said he had something to do with the sea and that he was imaged as a fish, but that's almost probably not true. That's based on later speculation. Because in Hebrew, the word for fish is dag, D-A-G. So Dagon, oh, maybe he's a fish god. But we have no archaeological evidence of that. We just know that he was worshipped throughout the Near East and eventually made it to the coastline, and apparently was an important deity for the Philistines. Now, again, the Philistines were farmers, and there is one inscription that comes from a little later, a little later, several centuries later, from this area. It's an inscription that speaks of the rich grain lands of Dagon. So maybe he was an agricultural god. But anyway, they bring him next to their god. And the idea is that, our God has defeated you. But then we're told when they come in the next morning, they find that Dagon's statue has fallen over and is face down next to the box, right? And obviously, the point here is that the Israelite God has subjugated the Philistine God, even though they have taken his ark, right? So they do this 3 times and figure out there's something wrong here, right? So they say, what do we do about this? We're not going to touch this place. Instead, and not only that, but then suddenly God sends a plague on Ashdod. And the people say, we got to get rid of this thing. What are we going to do with it? So, let's send it to our neighbors. They can take it, right? Our Philistine neighbors will take it to Gath. So they take it there, and unfortunately, the same stuff happens. There's another bad thing going in the city because of that. Plague breaks out, whatever, tumors. They all have tumors as a result of this. And so they send it to another city, to Ekron. Send it to Ekron. Maybe it'd be okay there. But eventually they figure out this thing is bad news. It's like it's a vector for illness. So they have to do something about it. They say, send it back to Israel. So that it doesn't kill us all. So you can see how this story goes. It's on the one hand, sort of, we won the battle, and yet their God is still defeating us. That's the idea here. Okay, so they ask their smart people, the priests and diviners, how do we do this? And they say, okay, well, you're going to send it back. You have to send it with some sort of offering, because you've offended this deity. You need to placate the deity so that you'll be healed from this plague that he's unleashed. It's a very Homeric thing. Has anyone seen the Odyssey yet? Yeah, I haven't seen it yet, but in the Trojan War, right? Actually, the Iliad, the prequel to the Odyssey, begins with Apollo sending a plague upon the Greeks, and they're trying to figure out, why is he doing this, and what do we do as a reparation? It's a similar sort of thing like that. Okay, so they then give specifics about what you're supposed to do. We're going to make 5 golden tumors, like get a tumor shaped in gold, and 5 golden mice. I don't know what the mice is for. It's correspond to the number of Philistine leaders, since the plague has struck all of you. So 5 of our cities have been struck. Let's send 5 gold artifacts back. And hopefully that'll make God friendly with us again. Okay, so they do. They say he did this to the Egyptians earlier on. Okay, so they get the box into a cart, a wagon. They yoke it to some oxen, and then they say, we're going to send it on. And once we get to the border of the Israelite territory, if it continues that direction, then we know that this is what's supposed to happen. So they're going to follow it. Okay, so they take it from Ekron, where it's been, and they let the oxen go to this town of Bet Shemesh, and to see what happens. It said the oxes went along the road. They didn't go right or left, meaning they really wanted to go here. Okay, so the people there, they're harvesting. They see the ark coming back miraculously, right? They didn't have to capture it in battle. So they're all happy about that. It's settled. The cows stop at a certain field of this guy named Joshua. And then they basically engage in a little sacrificial Thanksgiving. They take the ark out. They get the golden goodies, and uh, they are told that after they do this, the Philistines go home to report basically, I think God is placated. Meanwhile, we're told some of the people at that village did not join in the celebration that the ark came back, and they got struck down. So apparently, if you don't celebrate, then you get destroyed. Obviously, the point of the story is to show that this is an important artifact, right? There's no instructions you should celebrate. It's just they don't celebrate, and they end up the short side of the stick. They all mourn about this, and they try to figure out what to do with it. Finally, they're going to take it to another of our neighbors' place, this other place, Kiryat Yearim, and it's going to eventually stay there for a while. And then we're going to move back to the Samuel story. Now, the reason why this is important is because again, this is the symbol of divine sovereignty. Wherever it uh, is a marker of the presence of the divine. When a kingship is established, not this first guy, but the next guy, he's going to take that box and bring it to his castle, basically, so that wherever God is, I am. You know, political powers like to associate themselves with the divine. He's going to do that. But this is about why it was out of there in the first place. Okay, so that's that story. Okay, now we have time passes. 20 years. So Samuel's getting a little older now. At the end of the 20 years, suddenly, we have a kind of scene that we've seen in the book of Judges before. Up until now, Samuel has just been presented as a helper in a shrine and as this prophetic figure. But as we know, in the book of Judges, you can be a judge and a prophet at the same time. So this is a story about how Samuel the prophet also becomes a judge, right? And judge means both leading people in battle, but also adjudicating disputes, mediating disputes at the local level. Um, so in order for this to follow the pattern of the book of Judges, people have to be doing something wrong, right? And then they're going to write it, and then things will be going well as long as the judge is in office, basically, right? That's the pattern of the book of Judges. So they say, Samuel says, turn away from these other gods that you're worshiping. I didn't know they were worshiping other gods. Turn away from them and serve Yahweh alone, and then things will be good. So they did. And then we're told, let's all get together at Mizpah, which is a sort of a central shrine for our tribes. And I, Samuel, will pray for you to make sure that God is good with us. And they confess that they had worshipped other gods. And then at this place, Mizpah, we're told while they're praying, suddenly the Philistines decide to attack again. So again, there's another crisis. And so the people say, please, Samuel, cry out to God to save us. Well, that's the role of the judges, to save people, right? So we're told that he cried out and God answered him. And so they have a battle, and this time they win. The Israelites drive the Philistines away. And therefore, to commemorate this great victory and his own efficiency as a interceder and judge, he erects this stone here at this site. So remember this thing. He calls it Ebenezer. Remember Ebenezer Scrooge? Okay, this is where this word comes from. Eben means stone, and Ezer means help. So the stone of help, because this was the place the Lord helped us. Okay, so he establishes this place, and we're told, thus the Philistines were subdued. They never again entered the territory of Israel, for the hand of God was against them as long as Samuel lived. So now Samuel has been established as a judge as well as a prophet. Okay, we're told everything was at peace, everyone was happy, and we're told Samuel was like a circuit judge. There were like 3 major towns that he would go around and adjudicate cases. He would also go to his hometown and do that. Again, just describing his his office as judge. He gets old, as we all do. He also has sons, and we're told that his sons did not follow his example, but looked to their own gain, accepting bribes and perverting justice. Just like with Eli, right? Isn't that interesting, right? You have, first of all, Samuel's this great guy, and Eli is incompetent. His sons are terrible, so we like Samuel. But now Samuel has sons he can't control. So this is going back to the theme of power and authority and the abuse of it, right? So even with a judge, right? A judge might be good, but there's no guarantee that that will be genetically passed on to one's descendants, right? That's the great problem. You can't genetically pass on virtue to someone. So as we go into this thing about why a king will be chosen, uh, kings also tend to establish dynasties, right? And that too is always a problem in any monarchy, is you can't tell whether the next generation is going to be worth anything. So again, it's playing on this. He was great, but things went bad. And they have their own sort of circuit court down here. Okay, so people get upset at this, as they should, right? They say, you're old and your sons don't follow your example, so appoint a king for us, like all the nations, to rule us. Okay, here we have the kingship idea. So somehow a king would be better than a judge. I'm not sure how they're getting around that. Now, what they're going to talk about here with like the nations, they're thinking about a military leader. Okay, but didn't it just work out for them without a king, right? Samuel says, I'll pray to God and God will help you win the battle. And he did. So they were able to defeat the Philistines permanently without any king, right? Which is part of the irony of why they think they need a king right now. But they want a king. Samuel is displeased by this. And then God answers him. This important passage. He says, you are not the one they are rejecting me as their king. Okay, so that's them's fighting words. They're acting towards you just like they acted from the day I brought them up out of Egypt to this very day, deserting me to serve other gods. And that's fighting words too. So God interjects with this question to say to ask for a king is to worship another god. That's a pretty negative start for kingship, isn't it? And it's even more negative than what we heard in the Torah, which follows a lot of this passage as well. But in the Torah, it says you can have one if you want. But here it says it's like idolatry. So again, a much more negative view. But he says, go ahead, listen to them, give them a solemn warning, and inform them of the justice of the king who will rule over them. I put justice in scare quotes because God is being ironic here. Okay, justice means fairness, right? So we'll see that in this negative view of kingship, kings are never fair. But he'll call it justice here. Okay, so he says, warn them and see what they do. Going back now to the Torah. Remember, this was the law of kingship that we saw back here. Now, this is God talking to Moses centuries earlier. He says, when you come into the land which I'm giving you and have taken to possession of it and settled it, should you then decide I will set a king over me just like all the surrounding nations? Over us, just like the surrounding, notice the same language there. So if you say this, okay, you can have a king, but I will choose him. And it has to be one of your own people because someone who's not part of our covenant is not beholden to me, right? And then all the commandments about kingship are negative. You can't have a lot of horses, meaning you can't have military hardware, chariots. You can't have a number of wives, namely you can't have military alliances with people through marriage, and you can't have a lot of silver and gold. You can't have economic resources to impose your will. All that the king is allowed to do is write a copy of this law about the limitations on kingship upon a scroll written in front of priests, so he can't change it, right? And all of this is so that he does not exalt himself over his kindred or turn aside from this covenant. So we've already seen this critique of kingship, but it's a much more milder one than what we now have. Idolatry is much worse than just you may have it if you want. Okay, here is the justice of the king as Samuel is told to describe it. Now, even if you don't look at the text, look at the underlined words. What do kings do? They take, they use, they take, they tithe, they take, they tithe. Notice the unidirectional way here. Kings accumulate, they don't share in this negative viewpoint, right? everyone will be forced to work for the king, right? He'll take all of your stuff and give it to his friends. Okay, nepotism, right? And you will become his slaves. Okay, well, there you can see the point of conflict, right? Because how did the Israelites become the Israelites? How did they become a nation? They were freed from slavery to a king. So you can see how God's a bit upset at this. I freed you from slavery to be my slaves, to be my servants, and you want to have another God, basically. So he says, but I'll let you do it, but if you complain about it, I won't answer you. I won't take your calls. Okay, so the people say, no, this is what we want. There must be a king over us. Notice that must, that necessity. Uh, we're in a crisis. I mean, there's no crisis in the moment, but we're in a crisis. There's a world full of powerful people who are out to get us. We must have monarchic power to fight against it, fight fire with fire, right? It's all about battle here, right? And so Samuel repeats this response to God. God says, okay, let them do it, appoint a king. So there's the command now, appoint a king. Okay, so what are you going to do if you are going to appoint a king? There's never been a king in this cultural tradition. What are you going to do? You better call Saul, right? Okay, so the scene shifts. We know he has to appoint someone. He's not told yet who it is. But the narrator tells us there was this guy named Kish who had a son named Saul. And we're told that Saul was very handsome, handsomest person in the world, right? Head and shoulders above the people. Okay, so apparently, I don't know if this is a good qualification for kingship, but he's going to be our man for now. So let's call Saul. Okay, it starts off rather interestingly with some missing donkeys. So before Samuel ever meets this guy, Saul has to go on a journey. Right? This is, if you ever read Joseph Campbell, The Hero's Journey, very famous book. Uh, here's his journey. Okay, so Kish said to his son Saul, go take a servant and find where the donkeys went. Okay, so he's off to find donkeys. We're told they searched in Ephraim, they searched here, there, and here. They have found no donkeys anywhere. They have been totally unsuccessful. And now they come to the land of Zuph. It's a strange name. Well, if you have a map, you'll find that Zuph is the region where Samuel lived, right? So conveniently, the search for the donkeys leads them to Samuel. And Saul says, okay, servant, let's go home. We can't find the donkeys. He says, no. There's a man of God in this city up the road, and everything he says comes true. Notice we're not told who he is yet. Let's go there. Maybe he can tell us where the donkeys are. Saul says, but we have nothing to give him. Surely he would want something in return. He says, okay, I got a quarter shekel of silver. I got like 25 cents. I'll give that to the man of God and he'll advise us about the journey. He says, you're right. Let's go do it. Okay, so they're going to go to the city. On the way, runs into some women and he asks, is the seer in town? And then there's this editorial comment. We saw this in the book of Ruth, where there were these customs in the story that the readers would not understand, and so it has to be explained to them. Here it says, in former times, anyone who went to consult God would say, come, let's go to the seer, for one who is now called prophet was formerly called seer. So what that tells me is that the author of this story is writing at a time when people who communicate with the divine are called prophets, but they used to be called seers at the time when the story took place, right? So he says, where's the seer? He's always just up the hill there. He's about to sacrifice on the high place. Why don't you go join him? Okay. On the way up to the high place, he runs into Samuel. And we are told by the narrator, the day before Saul's arrival, the Lord had revealed to Samuel, there's this guy coming to you from this tribe. Who are you going to anoint as ruler of my people? He shall save my people from the hand of the Philistines. I've looked upon my people and their cry has come to me. So he sees him and God says, this is the man. Okay, a word about terminology here. So in the previous scene, the whole asking for a king, the word in Hebrew is melech. Melech is the common Near Eastern word for king. Notice that God does not say, I want you to anoint him as king. He says, I want you to anoint him as ruler. Now, that might seem like a hair-splitting difference. What's the difference between a king and a ruler? Isn't a king a ruler? Well, yeah, but the word in Hebrew is different. Melech is king. Nagid is the word for ruler. And in the most of languages of the Near East, a Nagid is not the king. The Nagid is the heir apparent to the king. So one way that kings would attempt to have continuity of good government and not risk their legacy being handed over to adult would be among their many children to pick an heir and to train that heir and associate that heir with his own government while he's still alive. So basically, the Nagid is an intern, right? And eventually, when the king dies, the Nagid will become king, right? So he says, that's my Nagid. But of course, there's a difference because God doesn't die, right? So that means that the ruler is going to be perpetually an intern. So notice how God is sort of reframing the idea of kingship here. You want a king who's absolute and all that, but I'm only going to give you a understudy here, right? And so he will be dependent on me, not just because I choose him, not just because I appoint him, but that he will always be the heir, not the king himself. That solves, at least intellectually, the problem of dual loyalties, right? There can't be a conflict of loyalty if the king is merely the heir. Right. Anyway, that's important. So he's going to do this. Okay, but we have to still have some conversation here. He says, I'm the seer. So where's the seer? I'm the seer. Come on, let's go up to the high place. By the way, your donkeys. He says, I didn't ask you about my donkeys. Your donkeys are okay. We'll talk about that later. So again, he's already demonstrating that he has some foresight. He also looks like he dyed his hair in this picture. Different artists, right? Okay. He says, why do you talk to me? I'm a member of the smallest tribe of Israel. My clan is the least among the clans. Why say such things to me? And of course, we know why, right? Because he has a great destiny ahead of him. Okay, so they have dinner together. He shows him hospitality. Saul dines with him. He has a good time. He gets to sleep on the roof, which actually is a good place to sleep in very hot environments. You want to sleep where there's cool air. And so the next morning, then the seer has his conversation with him. He got very old overnight. He has grayish hair now. It says, get up. I'm going to send you on your way. So, okay, the whole message is leave. But I'm going to tell you something. So on the way out, he says, oh, by the way, tell your servant to go away too. I want to talk to you privately. Okay, so now Saul is alone with the seer, with Samuel. Saul and Samuel are together. And immediately he anoints him, he appoints him, right? He pours oil on his head, kisses him, and says, the Lord anoints you Nagid over his people. You're the one who will govern them and save them from the power of their enemies. Why do you think he was so secretive about all this? Why do you think he's kind of keeping this out of not even the public view, but even the view of Saul's own companion? What could be the reason for that? Again, the Bible doesn't tell you. I don't know. But this is a long drawn out scene. God just could have said, call Saul, and that's it. But instead, you get this long-winded story about looking for donkeys. And then when he comes to have dinner with us, meet me on the roof, go down, leave your servant. Now he's going to do it. Why the secrecy, do you think?
About to avoid threats from jealousy?
Maybe. Because actually, if you go back to the book of Judges, which we looked at before the summer break, remember there was a person who tried to become king, right? And the assertion of power immediately led to challenge, right, by the next rival, right? So maybe that could be a reason. Any other reasons? I mean, literally, I don't know. The story invites us to think about this. Okay, well, let's see what happens. Okay, so right after that, he says, I'm going to give you 3 signs, no more, no less, to show you that this is legit. And basically, the 3 signs are that someone's going to tell you the donkeys have been found. Someone's going to give you some offerings, which you would normally give to God, and you are going to run into a group of prophets that are in this ecstatic state of possession, and you're going to be sucked into that and you'll be a changed person. So he's going to have a spiritual experience. When these three signs come to pass, do whatever lies at hand. Okay, so happily, we don't get a complete rehash of the signs. It just says that day all the signs came to pass. But we do have this one interesting thing about him being possessed. So on his way to town, he runs into this band of prophets, and the Spirit of God rushes upon him so that he joins them in prophetic ecstasy. So this be kind of like, speaking in tongues, jumping around, something like you lose control of yourself because you are taken over by another spirit. Um, and out of this comes this saying. It's like this proverbial saying. It says someone who saw this said, "What has happened to Tish's son? Is Saul also among the prophets?" And then the narrator says, someone responded, "And who is their father?" I.e., who? If you're asked, how does this guy who has a father become a prophet? Well, where did they come from? Who is their father? I'm curious as to what that means too. Is it that, well, anyone can be a prophet? Or is it, well, when you become possessed, God becomes your father? Something like that? I don't know. Apparently, it was a saying. Anyway, he comes out of prophetic ecstasy and he goes home. Okay, so he now is pretty sure that he's been appointed to be king. Nagib. Okay, uncle says, "Where have you been?" And he says, "Well, we got the donkeys back." But we're told he told uncle nothing about the kingship which he had been given. Why is he being secretive? This is not to a rival. This is to uncle. Why do you think he's not telling the full story to him? It can't be a problem of rivalry because it's within the family. I mean, it's the uncle. You can't challenge your uncle. The uncle's not gonna want to be king, I don't think. Why be secretive here? Why not tell? Because he asked, where have you been? He could have told him everything. You know, we found a seer. He gave me dinner. He told me things, and three signs took place. He didn't say anything to that. Why not?
Was he unsure of whether he wanted to accept the responsibility?
Interesting. Maybe he's not really ready for it. He's not sure if he's ready for it. He's been chosen, but he didn't want to respond yet. Maybe that's interesting. Anything else?
He said that he would be changed, that it would change him.
Yes.
So maybe like that's what's happening internally.
Hmm.
That like
I'm not ready to talk. I don't know how to talk about this yet.
yeah,
I don't know how to put it. The whole notion of mystical experience is that it is ineffable. You can't describe it in words. Maybe that experience, which he just fell out of, maybe he's still kind of getting his feet after that.
He was from the tribe of Benjamin.
Yeah, same tribe,
Okay, so how about the other tribes having buy-in to this? He's gonna be king of all Israel.
right? That's the idea,
So how convince them it's king?
right? So, but yeah, there's definitely hesitancy for whatever reason, which again drags this story out. I mean, this is the story chooses to drag out the process and looking at least asking questions about what's going on in his mind at this time, right?
Didn't
Sorry.
Saul disobeyed and ended up being tormented with the spirit? It's the
Next
same Saul, right?
Same Saul next week.
So
Tune in.
that means we just denied it.
He's going to have a different spirit later. Yes.
He went to the dark.
He went to the dark side. He's going to become Darth Vader, right? Um, yeah. So, no, that's a good point. I've never actually thought to connect those two, but indeed, in each case, he gets a spirit. And what do we mean by getting a spirit? I mean, this is sort of again that dual causality thing. Why do people do what they do? Is it something coming from within them? Is it something influencing them from without, or is it both and? Usually in the Bible it can be both and. But it did say like the Spirit of the Lord, which is yet another way of saying you can have a king, but he can't be independent of me. Right? The Spirit here means like the Spirit of Joshua, the Spirit of the judge. It's God empowering the person to do what they need to do. There's that famous saying, right? God does not call the equipped, he equips the called, right? This idea. So that the Spirit is part of that equipping. Okay, anyway, for whatever reason, he doesn't explain it. So Samuel sends out a Facebook blast and says, let's all come to Mizpah, and I have something to say. So he's back at the stone, right? Ebenezer. He calls everyone and says, God, who has taken you out of Egypt, you have rejected him by choosing a king, even though I warned you about it. Therefore, let's take your stand, and we're going to choose a king by lot, where he says, take your stand before the Lord according to your tribes and families. It doesn't actually explain how this process works, but it's some sort of oracular divination. It's like, tribe one, come forward. Nope, tribe two. There's some sort of oracular reference to say, okay, it's from this tribe. Now let's check every clan in this tribe. Which clan is it? Which family in the clan is it? And so forth. So it's a process of elimination. Okay, so they go through all the tribes. It's the tribe of Benjamin. It's the clan of Kish. And they can't find Saul. Instead, they had to consult God. Is there still somebody to come forward? God says he's hiding in the baggage with the donkeys. Well, you're suggesting maybe he's not ready. He's not sure whether he wants to accept, right? Maybe this is. But I mean, there's a bit of humor here to have to ask, God to say he's hiding in the baggage, rather than just look for him. And there he is hiding in the baggage. They ran to bring him from the baggage, and they take him. He stands head and shoulders above the others. Samuel addresses the people. Do you see the man whom the Lord has chosen? There is no one like him. And they say, long live the king. Okay, so a bit of comedy there. The king is sort of crowned or appointed from a heap of baggage. But again, why would he be hiding in the baggage? I mean, it really looks like he's trying to avoid this at this point. He's actively trying to avoid being chosen. Right? I mean, he's already been anointed, chosen, called, but he hasn't been publicly put in the spotlight, right? So he doesn't want this, apparently. Or maybe he's just, he's not sure, right? He's afraid. I would be afraid too. That's a pretty big responsibility, right? Um, so yeah, he's an interesting character, in other words, right? He's not a black and white character. He's going along with it. He's not actively. He's not like running away or anything like that. But he's not really ready to take it in hand yet. And we'll see whether that changes over time. Right? Because this is just about the point where we reach the end of episode 1 of Samuel. So again, Samuel reminds them of the rules of the monarchy, right? Which would have been, the ones we read earlier about how the king can't have any power. And then he sends everyone home. We're told that Saul went home as well, accompanied by warriors whose hearts the Lord had touched. Okay, so he's got sort of, a militia now joining him. But we're told some worthless people said, how can this fellow save us? And they despise him and bring him no tribute. So this is our stopping point for tonight, because it's the story has moved sort of in clockwork to getting the king and anointing him, appointing him, proclaiming him, and now the response is mixed, right? He's got lots of likes, but some dislikes as well. And that then raises the question of how will he perform? What will happen next? Because as you might imagine, there'll be another crisis that will come up there. The Philistines are attacking again, and he's going to have to see whether he's up to snuff. But as we move into the story next week, let's pay very close attention to what it says about what's going on in his mind, and also what it doesn't say is going on in his mind. Because as we see, we're not really given a psychological portrait. We're just seeing through his behavior raises questions about what his, impulses and motives might be. Okay, so that is the beginning of Samuel and Saul. And next week we get to do Saul and David. David will be the next character up. And as we'll see when we get into the story of David, kingship is a quite ambiguous and somewhat problematic thing, even for good people, for people who think they're good.